the subject is warning about electricity. And I want you to bear with me for the next few moments and also let me share with you two stories. One I have told recently, and this one is brand new out of Houston, Texas. And of course, when I say brand new, it's brand new at the time that we're taping it. I have a friend of mine whose name is Bobby, and he lives in Birmingham, Alabama. We often go to Alabama football games with him and his family. Pam and I do. And we were together recently at a game, and afterwards he was telling me a story about his neighborhood there in Birmingham, Alabama, and about the electricity in that area. And he was talking to a friend of his that helps run one of the power and energy plants there in the Birmingham area. And what Bobby told me that day was very intriguing, because I'm not a specialist in these areas, but I do like to keep up with it. And it had to do with the electrical grid. And so as they began to talk about how that in the summer, when the heat is high and people have their air conditioners on, how sometimes, especially on the West Coast, you'll have power outages and the power will go out for several hours because there's not enough power plants and transformers to run the amount of electricity that is being used. And they call that peak hours, that there are peak hours when the electricity is used, especially during summer seasons in the West Coast, Midwest, and especially in the South and Southeast. Now, the gentleman in Birmingham said to him, he said, Bobby, you have about 700 homes in your subdivision, correct? He said, yes. He said, let's talk for a moment about charging an electrical vehicle, what that would entail. He said, now, with 700 vehicles, no, he said it this way. He said, in your neighborhood of 700 houses, if one of 4 of those homes had an electrical vehicle, the power plant that I run would be able to handle the power. He said, but Bobby, let's say that every person in your neighborhood of 700 bought an electrical vehicle. If they were charging it at night, just your neighborhood, not the city, 700 homes, we've calculated that we would not have the power and it would knock the power off. And so I thought, wow, just 700. And these are not people that are for or against a different system. It has nothing to do with that. These are not people that are politically motivated. And sometimes when you begin to expose this, people play it into politics. This is nothing about politics. It's actually about people's lives and about how they're going to live. So I was in Houston, Texas recently at a great church, and I met a gentleman, and his name is Scott, and he began to tell a story. And I have power lines here, and he was there was a group of men that were working on some power lines, and Scott actually had something happen to where he got a hold of a live line, and I asked him, I said, now wait a minute, how come you didn't pull your hands off? How comes your hands gripped it? He said, because the electricity causes that to happen. He says, your hands just close and you absolutely cannot yank your hand loose by your own power. And he says it goes from here and it does this. And I said, well, how come it didn't immediately kill you? And then he explained to me how the electricity works and the voltage. If it was a higher voltage, it would have killed him instantly, but it was a much lower voltage that he was dealing with. But nonetheless, after it was over with, and he actually held onto that wire for, I think it was 25 seconds, and then they were able to lower that bucket and somehow separate his hands, but he lost both of his hands. And of course, he has the artificial hands that he uses now that he's able to eat and write and so forth. But he still works at the great power companies there in Houston, and he has a team of hundreds of men. Now, he tells me this story that I thought was intriguing. He said, now, during the peak season of the heat wave in Texas, in our area, he said so many people, and I don't think you saw this or heard this in the news, so many people had their air conditioners on. He said peak season, it has a certain time. We prepare to run the turbines and more energy during the peak hours, he said, the peak hours of the peak season. He said, but what was happening is when it should be lowering, it wasn't lowering. So people were out working And then they all come home, bam, all the air conditioners go on. He said, and I said, oh, no, wait a minute, are you telling me this? He said, yes. He said, we were repairing 70 transformers a day in Houston. Now, Houston, if you've ever been there, it takes you an hour to get from one end of the city to the other. There are millions of people that live in that area. So that's, not impossible. But they literally, every day, they were going out and having to replace because it was blowing out the energy. So I asked him, I said, now, everybody is talking about that there will be a law passed to do away with fossil fuels, and that's a whole nother subject, because if you try to do away with petroleum, you do away with plastics, all plastic. Then ladies, you do away with cosmetics, because petroleum's in cosmetics. That means you're gonna have to walk around with no makeup on. I could go on and on and on and tell you that the whole world operates off of petroleum products. And so it just boggles my mind that people have a narrow way of thinking, and they're running in this direction. They're running like a wild horse at the Kentucky Derby, and they're not looking to the left or the right, or looking to say, wait a minute, what kind of disaster are we headed toward, because of we're moving too fast in this? And he said to me, I said, what about electrical vehicles? And he just laughed. And he said, if a law were passed that electrical vehicles were to be used and you had to plug them into your home, he said, number one, we have not built oil refineries in years. So they've not, and he said they've not built them because this has been in the plan for so long to do away with all fossil fuels. He said, but number two, you have problems of millions of people in Houston, running in their cars, stuck in traffic, and they all have to go to substations that don't exist. There's only a handful of these stations that have the electrical plugs. And then you got to sit there for like 30 to 40 minutes to get your car charged. In most instances, if it's the electricity's gone in it. Then he said there's the case of all the batteries. If you take a car now and the battery goes out, the replacement's over $20,000. Then he said after 5 years, you have to replace all the batteries. So what does that do? And then what do you do with the batteries that are being not used? Then you got all this junk out there, and he wasn't for or against. I want to make this clear. He was just giving me the facts from his perspective as a professional electrician. He said, but here's the big one. He said, let's say that we are in Houston and everybody's running their electricity, and let's say we're able to cover that power, but as nobody's working at the stations but a handful of people, and the power level goes down as people should be sleeping at night, now 1 million people are charging 1 million vehicles. Guess what? He said, you have to choose between electricity for your car or air conditioning in your home in the South. He said, there's no other way around it. We have not built enough power plants. And he told me it will take a generation, many years and years. He said, I'm not talking about 5 and 10 years. It will take years to build all the substations and to build the power plants necessary to do just what they're planning right now that they want done by 2020, 2030. And he said, it's impossible. I'm telling you, it's impossible. So what he was warning me about was the danger to the electrical grid. The electrical grid in the United States, I don't know if you know this or not, has not really been updated either. We do have nuclear power plants, but we're not really building more of those because of the environmental issue involved with that, with radiation. Although there are many of them around, we live between one up here at Watts Bar, one in Chattanooga, nuclear power plants, not electrical, but nuclear power plants. And so we're coming into, and it could be, unless we slow this thing down and begin to build the stations that we need, and we begin to build the power stations, and this is according to him, this professional man, he's a pro, been doing this all of his life just about, then there will be serious trouble, and the lights are going to go out in the major cities. And when the lights go out, guess what that does to crime? And so I don't know if there's a solution to this, because it's such a hot button issue right now with certain individuals and certain groups that it's almost like they see the picture of what they want, and they're forcing it to happen, and they're not sitting down on a piece of paper and say, okay, what's the real pros and cons to this? Oh, here's the pro, here's the pro. There's nothing in the danger list. And there are people like Scott and others that we've talked to that say, well, let me tell you what the danger is. If they proceed as fast as they're going, without thinking this through and doing what they need to do. And there is a danger list. And so I don't have a dog in this hunt, as the old expression says. I'm just the reporter. I'm just the journalist. I'm just the source that brings you the information from other sources. But I do think it's something that we need to consider, and we need to really look into the possible repercussions of this, in not just trying to force everything to happen and pass quick laws because, we're trying to save some animal or save the planet. The tribulation's coming. I don't know what these people are going to do when the judgment of the tribulation comes, because that's coming from God. You can't vote him in, vote him out. He's going to do what he wants to do. But I wanted to share that with you. And let me ask you something. We've turned our comments off on YouTube, and a lot of you don't like that, but we did that because we can't keep up with the good people that we love to hear from and the crazy people that we don't want to hear from. So it was too much for us. We've cut the comments off. But if you watch this and you on our social media, and you have a story that's an accurate story about this particular thing, or if you want to send me a story that perhaps is someone you work with, or maybe your husband or your son works at a place and this is what they're actually saying, we'd be glad to receive that and look over that. And we appreciate those of you who do stay in contact with the ministry over the years, and also the prayers and support that we get. Now, speaking of that, stay tuned for the next few moments for something special I'm going to share with you. So watch the video to the entire end, subscribe to the channel, and if you learn things that you enjoy learning, give us a thumbs up. God bless you. I heard this many times on Saturday afternoon. I have never missed a main event in many years, and this week's services were the greatest revelation of God's Word yet. Personally, the morning services released the most profound, right now, practical series of revelations that I've actually ever heard in my 46 years of ministry. The 5 messages that I preached were all new insights.
If you enjoyed this YouTube content, there's an important website you should know about: perrystone.org. Perrystone.org is an essential resource for the latest books, audiovisual presentations, and digital products from Perry Stone Ministries. Resources that cover the same kinds of topics discussed in the program you just watched. Stop in and see all that's available at perrystone.org.